Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. I know it's after work on a weeknight, so I appreciate those of you who made the trek. And welcome to all of you on Facebook Live, those of you who are joining us. Some of you are joining us after the fact for the recording. I want to apologize in advance for the audio quality. We've made steps to improve it over the last time. We're going to get to the point where we have a lavalier mic. We just couldn't get it integrated with a phone, so we've got a solution that should make it a little better tonight than it was last time, and hopefully it's good for you out there in faraway land. Those of you here, I'm sure you can all hear me fine. Yeah? Okay, great. So just a little bit about myself. My name is Dave Caro. My title now is Developer Advocate. Sometimes people are developer advocates. You've heard that term technical evangelist probably before. Developer advocate is a little more neutral. I'm not trying to advocate any particular religion or dogma. I'm just trying to help people get stuff done who are trying to shift left their testing, to do testing sort of earlier in the process in more of a development environment. And my background, I was with Keynote Systems for 7 years, and my focus there was load testing and synthetic monitoring. So if you haven't heard of Keynote, it became Dynatrace. Keynote has nodes all over the world that visit websites robotically and report back the statistics. That's kind of an earlier generation of monitoring. Most monitoring these days is done with real user traffic, not with synthetic traffic, but people do a mix. The load testing we did there was primarily turnkey consultant-driven load testing, which is sort of save my bacon, I need a really big load test to make sure I'm ready for my big event. And I'm not sure my people are ready, but please help me do an external test to make sure my infrastructure is ready and my code is ready. We also had a self-serve product, but that was a smaller part of our business, and it was a less serious tool. So the self-serve product could sort of do brochureware and kind of simple stuff, but it couldn't really do complex workflow. Not easily anyway. But the turnkey product we had could do anything. It's basically there's nothing we couldn't do, but it was all done by consultants. And the problem with that is that you have to hire the consultants and schedule the consultants and get them transfer knowledge to the consultants and do all that sort of stuff. So my background, I started with load testing. It was actually mostly done by consultants who weren't even working for the same company, or they're just kind of these people that work from afar. Keynote became Dynatrace on an acquisition. I worked there for a little bit after that, and we did some rethinking of how to run our business, but mostly it was just kind of the same business with some optimizations done. Then I moved to SOSTA. And I don't know if you've heard of SOSTA or not. How many people by show of hands have heard of SOSTA? Okay, so it's not SOASTA. Tempted to call it SOASTA. It's actually named after Service-Oriented Architecture System Testing Application. But it's SOSTA. And SOSTA was recently acquired by Akamai. And the reason they were acquired by Akamai is that they had sort of two things. Their original thing they did was load testing. And then they got into real user monitoring, which is tracking how real users behave and what their experience is when they go there. And so they have a load testing product, but again, their load testing product was kind of like the one I came from, which was mostly done by consultants, mostly done by people who have to transfer knowledge to, and it takes a lot of time, it's a lot of effort, and it's very specialized. Now, the reason I left SOSTA for BlazeMeter was that I knew that what was happening in the world was that people wanted to do load testing and performance testing earlier in the process. Right? They wanted to do it not as a fire drill at the very end. They didn't want to wait until their hair was on fire, or they didn't want to wait until the end to run a test, which would then turn their hair on fire because they realized they weren't ready and they were almost supposed to be done with their project, right? So I came to BlazeMeter because BlazeMeter had a vision for doing testing to the left, doing it in development environments, and also making it easier for more people to get access to the tools. So that kind of catches us up to where we are, except for the very last line, which is CA Technologies, the continuous delivery unit that I'm in. CA acquired BlazeMeter, so I'm now part of the continuous delivery unit of CA, and we have some amazing test efficiency tools there. Tonight's talk isn't about products that are for sale. We're going to talk about an open source product. This is kind of what I'm doing. This is kind of my day job. I have to focus on that stuff, but I also focus on advocating to the community, which is why we're here. So a bit of our agenda. I'll spend just a minute talking about why we are here, just sort of why does this exist? Why are we doing this? Okay. And then 4 fundamentals about Taurus. By show of hands, how many people learned about Taurus before tonight? Okay, how many people are learning about Taurus for the first time tonight? Excellent. Everybody raise their hand to one of the other questions, which is awesome audience participation. Usually you ask the question and you get some people aren't going to vote. So cool, you're in the right place. We'll talk about the fundamentals so you'll understand, and then we'll go. This is part of what we call a Going Deeper series. Doing a series of webinars and meetups to help people go deeper with what is Taurus, and then today's demo. Most of you probably came because you heard there's going to be talk about an automation product and how you can script complex scenarios. And I want to thank probably our farthest writing attendee, comes all the way from Kelseyville, for suggesting that we go a little deeper with this topic, and that's what we're doing. And then hopefully I'll have some Q&A. I have a couple extra topics we'll get to if we have time, but my guess is we're going to have a kind of a full agenda, so let's jump right in. So the first thing is, why we are here. And I'm going to step over here. Javier, am I still on the camera? Am I good? Okay. So imagine you've got a centralized testing function or a centralized development function, frankly. Let's rewind the clock, right? Okay, let's go back to 10 years ago. Development was in large groups, siloed groups, centralized groups that kind of worked as a monolith for the most part. And there might have been project teams in here, but they're kind of one organization. And what's happened with the move to Agile is the move to multiple separate smaller teams. And the goal with these smaller teams is to be independent and to be self-contained. And the reason for that is that you don't end up with handoffs and backlogs and waiting and queues and all that sort of stuff. Each of these teams has a smaller part of the problem to solve and does it on their own schedule. Okay? And the where we are in the world is that that's started to definitely happen with development. And it's even started to happen with continuous integration. These teams will have their own continuous integration environments. But testing is sort of making that move. And it's not really, there's still a lot of people trying to figure out how do we do testing? Should we just wait until late in the process and throw the code over a wall and let somebody who hasn't been involved in all the thinking test the code, right? If I describe it that way, it doesn't make a lot of sense, right? The old way we used to do it, which is that we'd basically build an app and then we'd hand it off to a separate group and we'd hand them a specification and we'd say, okay, here's the specification, here's the code. By the way, you don't have a lot of time, but find the bugs and then send me back a list of the bugs and then we'll have a bug burn down and it'll take a while. And what the new model is that you do all the work in smaller groups and the testers are in these groups and everybody in this group understands everything that's happening with this project. The term for agile teams is often referred to as, anybody know what the term is? If I hold these two boxes, what's it called? Two pizza team. Why do they call it a two pizza team? Anybody got a guess? Because you don't want the team to be any bigger than you can feed with two pizzas. Right? Now you laugh because you probably haven't seen a lot of sort of 10 or 12 person teams that are doing all the work, right? But that is the model, and the idea is that you parallelize. So instead of building a giant monolithic app, you're building a small microservice or a small part of an app. And you go with large pizzas or small pizzas? Large pizzas. I think you can go large. And there's a place in San Carlos that makes a Godzilla pizza that's like that. So if you can kind of, like anything, Agile can be stretched, right? So again, I'm spending a lot of time on this slide, but the deal is we're trying to create a more sustainable software development lifecycle culture where it doesn't make sense to work for a long, long time and then have a crunch period where you realize I got a lot of stuff that's still broken, and then I got to fix it, and I go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and it's very inefficient. And people want code fast, they want it now. Well, it's not, getting code fast doesn't mean you need to work harder and faster and I need people to stay all night. No, it's about creating an environment where if you change code before you go to lunch, when you come back from lunch, there's an email or a Slack or something, a chat that says, hey, you broke something, right? Hey, not really good news, but hey, I caught something before it went into the build. You probably ought to fix it, right? And that's continuous testing, right? And the idea is that if you break something and an hour later, 2 hours later, you were told you broke it, it's much easier to go back and fix it when it's still fresh in your mind than it would be to get 2, 3, 4 weeks, a month later, 6 months later, be told this module has a bug in it, right? So that's where the world is going. And part of this is testing where the development, having testing start anyway, where development is done. Might you still have a centralized testing function? Yes. Might you still do last-minute testing before you ship code or before you push it to production? Yes. But you want to find almost nothing then. You want to be very bored and you want to have tests that just pass, not because you've written them to just pass, but because you've gotten the problems earlier in the process, right? So that's what we're up to. Question?
We ask questions.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
You want to say it for the end?
No, it's fine. Let's make it interactive.
So just the end would be what I would almost define as testing or end-to-end testing then?
Yeah, end-to-end. So the question was, the end is what you might call system testing or end-to-end, sometimes integration testing. You know, there's phases. It's really there's sort of unit at one end, and there's build and integration in there somewhere, and then there's system or end-to-end testing. And true end-to-end testing actually tests the infrastructure, not just the app. So the production infrastructure should actually at some point get tested before real money is at stake, before users are surfing through it, right? Oh, good. My computer's scheduled to go to sleep automatically. I think I'll decline that. Say that would be a bad thing.
Just a quick update. We lost Facebook for a moment.
Okay. And you're bringing it back?
Yeah.
So we were talking about what is that late stage testing? It's integration testing, or it's end-to-end testing, and or even infrastructure testing to make sure the production infrastructure, you know, that still makes sense, but that's not when you want to be finding a problem. You don't want to find there's a fundamental flaw in a piece of logic or in some subroutine 3 weeks before you're going live, right? You want to find that out an hour after it's coded or a day after it's coded. Basically, 24 hours is kind of the worst case scenario, that you want to learn a bug within 24 hours. And the idea, you don't build a bug backlog, you squash bugs as they occur, right? So that's also one of those paradigm shifts. It's not about building up a big long list of bugs and burning them down. It's about finding bugs in near real time and fixing them in near real time, right? So that's what we're trying to do, is create a world where it's easier to do testing without having to have testing be a separate function. And this doesn't mean the QA goes away. It actually more often means the QA melds into these teams, by the way. And QA becomes a mentor that actually, here's the crazy part, brace yourself, teaches the developers how to test. Okay? And there's an awesome webinar. Just Google quality at speed Jira. So the Jira people put together a webinar on how they did a multi-year project to actually teach the developers how to code. They're a startup, so they started with no QA because they're a startup, not because they thought that was a bold thing to do. And they went on a path to actually, instead of quality assurance, they had quality assistance. And the quality assistance was a small team that actually helped the developers learn how to test their own code. And it took them 5 years to get to a point where only 4% of the code ever needs to be messed with after it's touched for the first time. So that's pretty awesome to actually build all your code and only have 4% of it have some kind of a problem, right? So shifting to the next topic here. So 4 fundamentals of Taurus. Just want to make sure people understand Taurus. Sometimes I explain, if you've heard of the analogy of the blind men and the elephant. So if there's 4 blind men kind of rocking around an elephant, the one that grabs the trunk thinks it's some kind of a hose-like thing, and the one that grabs the legs thinks that it's like a tree, and the one that runs into the side of it, I don't know what they think. It's a balloon, right? So I kind of want to point out that there's different sides to Taurus, and we want to understand what they are. The first thing is that, yes, it's an open source project. You can get it at gettaurus.org. So gettaurus.org is where it lives. That's where the knowledge base is. That's where the videos are. That's where the link to the forum on Google is to discuss and ask questions. The second thing is that it's both a test runner and a DSL to native test compiler. So let's take that apart. Test runner is an orchestration platform for making it very easy to run lots and lots of tests and have it be unified across multiple people, to be really easy to understand. Hey, I've just got, my artifacts are all very well organized, and it's very easy to run tests, and it's very easy to put them in CI, very easy to automate and do things through tools, right? So that's test runner, and that could be a test that you actually already exist. You might already have a JMeter test, but you want to be able to run it in an automated way and get back pass-fail criteria and be able to override the load levels and override the currency, override the duration, all these things. You want to be able to do it more programmatically. It lets you do that as a test runner. As a DSL to native test compiler, so DSL is domain-specific language, so you can actually define a test in a human-readable text format, YAML, or in a sort of a spit out of a program format, which would be JSON. They both have the exact same syntax, they're just expressed in the 2 formats, right? That then is compiled into a JMeter, a Gatling, a Grinder, a Sung, a Siege test, right? Selenium. So you can actually, without opening those tools, create a test that actually runs that using that technology. And there's 2 benefits to that. One is that the DSL is consistent across those tools, and it's very source code friendly. So tools vary on whether they're source code friendly or not. JMeter happens to be the biggest tool that's used for performance testing and the least friendly for source, because it stores everything in an XML file. In the XML file, if you change one little attribute of your XML file, you get back a huge diff that says, "Whoa, this huge block of code just changed," right? And that's not very useful. Whereas if it's stored as DSL, there's a line you change, which for concurrency went from 100 to 250. Bob changed it yesterday. You do a diff, boop, that's what changed. Super easy, right? So source friendly, right? So now I've drawn a red dotted line. Hopefully you can see that here. So the third bullet is it can run locally with n equals 1, or it can run via BlazeMeter where n is an infinite number. And this is not a commercial presentation tonight. We're talking about Taurus. I just want you to understand how Taurus also has features on the commercial BlazeMeter solution, which is that Taurus, it runs on a laptop or on a build server or on a Jenkins server, whatever, and it can do sort of one thing at a time that way. And that's great for a developer of their desktop. It's not really great for having a server that's running tests for 50 people concurrently because it's just lots of jobs are being checked in and stuff. So it runs great on a developer's desktop, and it can run sequentially as part of like a Jenkins server or something. When it's coupled with BlazeMeter, it can fan out, and it can do parallel testing, right? And also can do scaled up testing. So it can do really big tests, but more importantly for what we're talking about tonight, which is the sort of shifting left and development centric testing, is it can run a large number of tests at the same time independently, right? And then the last bullet here feeds BlazeMeter reporting and collaboration features. So paid or not paid, you can actually use a free BlazeMeter account to get enhanced reporting capabilities and the ability to collaborate, easily share your artifacts and the results of your test using the BlazeMeter product. If you have a paid account, then you might have projects and work groups and all this kind of stuff. But even a free account has this benefit. But I'm drawing a line here, which is that this stuff it does whether you're going to use BlazeMeter or not. And this stuff it does if you have a BlazeMeter account. So just wanted to kind of, but again, so Taurus, the most important part really is this part here. It's a test runner, and it's also a DSL to native test compiler. And the second bullet, actually we'll do both bullets tonight. If you want to go deeper, I created a doc that I put up on the forum that is at this short Google URL. You might want to write that down. That provides a lot of links into docs that exist or videos, et cetera, that exist to understand Taurus better, right? So just a kind of a cheat sheet for understanding Taurus, and I can share that later when we're done. But let's get into the main attraction, which is a lag on my screen here. Here we go. So complex session-based scenarios in Taurus DSL. And the reason why this topic exists is that we've shown how Taurus works, and often we do sort of what I would call a hello world example, which is we said, hey, look, it can hit a web page. And people are like, yeah, but my app is more than just a web page. Like I've got to log in, I've got to do stuff, I've got to parse things, there's things I have to do. Can it really do that? And the answer is yes. If we have a lecture time, we're going to also talk about converting SOAP UI tests into performance tests.
Precursor question.
Sure.
So how do you see your typical user? Do they usually come with their existing load tests and then make Taurus?
Great question. So the question is, does the typical user come with their existing load tests, or are they creating something from scratch, right? As a test runner, it's perfectly happy to execute existing tests unchanged or with some overrides or whatever. So some people will come with tests. Now, let's say you're a JMeter expert, just a guru in JMeter, right? But you're being asked to mentor developers to do their own testing, right? Who don't know JMeter. Now, you could try to teach them JMeter, or you could say, here's a text-based format of some fairly straightforward stuff and some design patterns that I can share with you. And those are all based on what's in JMeter anyway, right? The looping, RegEx extractors, JSON path, all the kinds of things you could do in JMeter. You can do in the JMeter, the part of the DSL that's been designed to cater to building JMeter tests, right? So an existing expert could actually use Taurus to spread testing wider to people who don't want to learn JMeter, if that makes sense, right? And then people who want to get into a new tool, like let's say you don't know Gatling, and you don't know Scala, and you don't know all the layout, all the files and everything, you can actually use Taurus to generate a Gatling test for you and run it. And then when you're done, you've got all the artifacts and you can actually build it from there. You go, oh, it's got these.
How do I know that I need Gatling and not Locust?
Can you repeat the question?
The question was, how do I know if I need Gatling and not Locust, for example? You don't, and you can do either. So this is the whole point with Taurus, is that it actually supports pretty much any major tool that's out there. It provides this feature, okay? And you might say, well, how do I know? Well, Gatling, one thing about Gatling is it has this, it doesn't use individual threads. It has a more of a message-based style where it actually can create a higher amount of concurrency from less hardware. And it has other things, pros and cons too, and there's actually a webinar you can look at it to learn more about that. Each of these tools has some strengths and weaknesses. And sometimes it's just what people know how to code in. People who know Scala are going to be drawn to Gatling. People who want to do PHP, right? So each of these tools has different things that are about it. JMeter has the biggest audience because it's it's been around and it's pretty well known, and it doesn't require coding. Ironically, for the most part, JMeter has a GUI, and it sort of makes sense once you learn how it works, how things are, and it's kind of click, 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 as opposed to having to write a program, right? So that's, again, it's kind of the pros and cons. The benefit is that anybody can just grab it and quickly crank out a quick test without having to learn a lot. But when you're writing complex tests, it actually becomes kind of a little bit cumbersome.
But that's again brings you to the point that you have to select the load tool first and then go. You cannot go top down.
Well, I think it's kind of an iterative thing, which is that people may use JMeter for 2 or 3 or 4 years and run into a situation where they're trying to build a library of reusable components and they want a lot of reusable code and such, and they might then be drawn towards a tool which is more code-centric, like Gatling, right? And they make that transition, right? So you can get a lot of work done first before you decide to move. So let's talk about the complex scenario we're gonna do tonight, right? Which is that we're gonna log into an e-commerce system. We're gonna create a new product in the catalog. And to do that, we're going to go into the products area. We're going to make a note of the highest product ID number that exists already. We're going to parse that out of the page. And then we're going to add a new product by incrementing the product ID by 1. And then we're going to log out. Okay? So, not a hello world, not crazy complex, but here's what it looks like. So we're using a sandbox from a company called 2Checkout, which is a shopping cart provider. And we'll go to the login screen. We'll post a login to it. Once we get in, we'll navigate to the products area. Once we get into the products area, we'll see a list of the products that exist already. And we'll figure out what the highest product ID number is in the catalog so far. And then we'll click, well, we're not really going to click, but we'll do the equivalent of clicking the Add New Product feature to start the page that actually lets us create a new product. And then we'll post a form with the information. Here's my product ID, here's the description of the product, all that sort of thing, right? And then when we're done, we'll log out. Okay, any questions about this flow? Pretty straightforward, right?
Selenium or
So,
APIs?
So the question was Selenium or API. Effectively, we're doing API. We're going to do the protocol dialogue, right? And it's a great question because in reality, most modern web apps are really just a series of API calls. Right? But there may be stuff you have to parse from one call to the next to keep the session going and that kind of thing. So let's jump over to code here, and I will make it bigger. And it should make a nice big crayon. All right. Awesome. Okay. So in the back, can you read it? Okay.
Can you make it a little larger for the audience on
I cannot make it larger than that. That's about as big as I go.
Okay.
So I'm actually going to scroll to the bottom of the file because sometimes when you start at the end, things will make more sense. So let's actually go to the end of this file, and I'll tell you what's going on. All right. So at the very, very end, there's a block down here where it says requests. Include a scenario called login, include a scenario called product creation, include a scenario called logout. Those should sound familiar to what we just walked through, right? And then there's this execution block here which says run that scenario. So I should scroll over so you see this actually. So this scenario called executor, and that's an arbitrary name. Executor here could have been Fred or Betty. Has some defaults that'll affect everything that happens in that scenario. Whether cookies are stored, whether redirects are followed, timeouts, some headers that are common to all the requests. And then it says, I want to send some requests that are from some other scenarios. And if you scroll up to the top of the file, you'll find there's a login scenario, and a product creation scenario, and a logout scenario, right? And at the bottom, it says, hey, run that, and run it 3 times with a concurrency of 1. And there's a line here where it says ramp up 30 seconds. I commented that out because when you're running concurrency of one, there's really no ramp. Right? Ramp up is if you have more than one concurrency, it's how long you would take to get from your first user to the full number of users, right? So, and at the very bottom, there's this thing that says included configs, pass-fail criteria.yml. That's another one of these DSL files, right? And provisioning is local. So now that you kind of have the high-level structure of this thing, which is what we're going to do these two things, let's go to the top. And the very first thing I'm doing is I'm saying, for the module called JMeter, I want to define some properties, and I'm going to set that HTTP sampler.ignore failed embedded resources is true. So this is fairly self-explanatory. Ignore failed embedded resources. So this is if you're running a test and there's a resource that gets called in a page, like a GIF or a JPEG or a JavaScript file or whatever, and it has a failure. Don't end the test because some piece didn't come into the page. Right? I don't really care. I'm testing the back end here. I'm not really testing the front end, right? And then define host to be sandbox.tocheckout.com, right? So there, in this case, you're setting a variable and you're setting the value of this this property here. Now, then here come the scenarios. So the way that this has been divided up is that there's a login scenario which handles getting into the product, then there's that create the product and catalog, and then there's a logout scenario, right? So for the login scenario, I've defined a data source, and it just says data source : new line indent, right? Path user data.csv. So I've got another file that contains the user data for logging in. And actually, I'm not going to show you that CSV because that CSV has my password in it. So, but just trust me, that's actually, in this case, just a one-row CSV file. It's actually got a header row, and it's got a data row, and it contains username and password, right? And then we come down here, and there's this section called requests, and this is really the traffic I'm going to send, right? And the first one is to hit this URL, which is takes the property host and goes to that URL and just does a get, and it's basically going to the page that is the login page, right? And when it gets there, it's going to assert that the page contains the text "log into your sandbox." Did I get to the right place? Is the system up? Right? And it's going to look in the body for that. And this is a regular expression. It could be plain text, but in this case, we're saying it's a regular expression, so it uses RegEx rules, right? And then the second request is going to this URL, which is that host name again, /sandbox/login, and it's going to do a post to that URL with, scroll down a bit here. Okay, so it's going to do a post, and there's some headers we're setting, the origin, the content type, and refer. And then the body of this request, this post, is just the username and the password. So it sends those as the post body. And then it asserts, once this has been submitted, that you get account status as part of the text that comes back. Right? Because when you log in, you're going to get, that's part of the text on the screen is account status, right? So now we've successfully gone through the scenario, which is login. Any questions about what that did?
What does dash mean?
That's part of the syntax. And the links that I shared on the slide that I'll share after gives you everything you need to know about how YAML works in the context of Taurus in sort of 3 screenfuls, maybe 4 screenfuls. You can just kind of learn the tutorial, right? Indentations are super important. Tabs are not spaces, must be spaces. So there's some syntax rules that sort of apply here. But once you know them, YAML is YAML. So let's go down. Javier?
Just to point out that there are actually YAML editors available online that.
Yeah, they'll actually validate it, and yeah, they'll help you. Yeah. And I think that, yeah, true. So now we've logged in. So let's actually scroll up and go to the scenario called product creation. All right. So again, we have some headers that apply to multiple requests, so we're defining them up top here. One of them is the origin and the refer. Okay. And then we've got another data source. So this data source in this case is called product info CSV. That one contains a lot of the stuff to fill in all the fields on the form. Okay, so you can define it there. You don't have to have it in the body of your script. And then we have a series of requests. So the request is go to the host name /sandbox/products, do a get, and you're at the products area, right? And then when you do that, run a RegEx extraction, excuse me, to populate something called product ID. So you're saying I need a RegEx extraction. It's going to put the result into something called product ID. And here's the regex. In this case, it's a very complex regex that knows how to parse that page that had the columns of data and cruises through and grabs the last occurrence of product ID on the page, right? It sets a default in case it doesn't find something, and tells it to look in the body. Now here, commented out is another way to do the same thing using XPath. Now the XPath is actually a little more expensive to run at volume, but we're running one of these, so it really wouldn't matter. It's also a little more self-explanatory about what you're looking, these are IDs in the page. So if you're used to web development tools, this is probably a little more intuitive for you, right? So that's in there. And then after we, remember, we're hitting that page really just to get to the right place and get the list of the current products so we can parse out the highest number. And we assert that it contains this text. This is a list of existing products. If you go to if there's no products in this account, it actually gives a different message. It says something like, you have no products to find, right? Now, this script could actually deal with that. Because of the default, it would actually still succeed, but you get an assertion failure. Hey, this isn't what I expected. Then we click the link that would be for create product, right? And we're not really clicking a link. Again, we're sending in this case, we're sending a get, which is to sandbox products create product, right? At which point the system returns a form to fill out. And then we populate that form by creating a big old post that's going to go back to that create product URL, right? So I'm doing a post to that URL, and I'm setting some headers here to www form URL encoded. And then here's the body, and I've got all these fields. And most of these fields are coming from variables that are set in that product CSV that we saw, right? Except the product ID is actually coming from the value we got when we did we parsed out the highest product number. But you're saying to yourself, wait a minute, if I parsed out what the highest product number is, I don't want to use that. I need to increment it by 1, right? So the way that gets done is actually by what in JMeter is called a preprocessor, okay, which is that there's this standard JSR 223, which defines script, inclusion of scripts and Java-based stuff. And in this case, we're going to use Groovy, and we're going to execute this before the requests happen, and we're going to populate we're going to use this product ID as a parameter, and we're going to send it to this Groovy file. Now, this could all be in line, by the way. The Groovy text could actually have been right here. And I kind of wish in hindsight it had been. This was designed to sort of, I had some developers build this for me, which is good. I wanted to get a developer's mindset, right? But in this Groovy file, which I can show you in a minute, it's just a very short little, almost looks like regex. What it's doing is it's taking the value, converting it converting it into an integer, adding 1 to it, and turning it back into a string, right? That's all it's doing, right? So then what happens by the time product data gets here, it's actually been incremented because this is a pre-processor, so it gets done before the request is sent. This request, since it's typical, this is standard JMeter stuff. If you have a request going and you define a preprocessor, it gets executed before the request gets fired, right? So in this case, we're saying I want to do this before, and I'm going to run the script, right? So any questions about how we're submitting the form? Make sense? We basically have all the stuff that we're just going to do a post, and that's the post body, and it's going to say, product ID is this, recurring is this, so, whatever. Right?
How was this generated?
The team that built this for me probably just used debugging tools or there's lots of ways to watch a browser session and sort of build a transcript, right? I don't actually know what they used, but they could have used a recorder. The easy way, by the way, is just use a recorder. You can't just copy and paste the recorder into here, but the recorder would capture a lot of this stuff for you. And our own recorder, the BlazeMeter online recorder, actually has an output format for Taurus, specifically for Taurus, that actually cranks stuff out in this format. So one way to speed it up would be to use that recorder and clean it up and add logic and add more, like it wouldn't put all the variables there necessarily. It'll guess at some variables, but it would definitely have captured all of the stuff that went in the form, and then you would put in your own tokens. Javier?
In fact, there are two types of recorders we have. So
True that.
that mainly used for our developers. One is through a Chrome extension,
yeah,
and the other one will be a proxy recorder.
Yeah.
Why didn't they just send HTTP request and parse JSON and then send another one?
Well, you're effectively doing that. You are sending a request, parsing a result, and sending another request. So you mean like just using some like basic scripting language, like do it by hand?
Like requests library or something.
I see. Okay, right. Question in the back?
Yeah, Javier, you mentioned there was and I've heard in previous presentations, there's a JMX to gamble converter, I think.
Correct.
If you had a JVM script and you had the RegEx extractor and all those components, would they get translated?
Yeah, the question was if you use, so we had a JMX to YAML converter, which is meant to take an existing JMeter test and turn it into a Taurus YAML file. And if we have the construct, and we generally have the constructs for RegEx, for assertions, for all that stuff, it literally will just boop, convert it over and give you that, right? So that's its intention, is to take an existing JMX and put it in more of a source code friendly way that also might be easier to explain to somebody who's not a JMeter expert, right? Okay, so the last one is logout, super simple. Logout is literally just has to go to URL and do a get to the logout URL. The system knows what to do, right? So we've walked through what each of these things does. We've seen RegEx extraction. We saw path extraction too. That's actually commented out. We didn't use it. We were using variables. We're not really maintaining session in terms of we didn't like parse out a session ID and reuse it, but we could have. We know how to do RegEx. We could have parsed out a session ID and put it in a variable and used it if we had to. So we've done all that stuff, and then we get down to this block here. And by the way, this is, I'll be honest, this is deliberately a little more complex than it has to be. I asked these guys to code this like a developer would if they were trying to be structured and thinking about it like they were writing code. So the fact that we're using external files where we don't have to, the fact that we're defining all these things, that they're trying to show the features. So there was actually a loop in here originally that actually did a logic loop, through the adding products to the catalog. I simplified it a little bit, right? So we're now we've learned how the pieces work, and then remember this one that's called executor, that's not a verb. Execution is a verb, like is a reserved word in Taurus. Executor is they just chose to call it that. This could have been my friend Sally, all right? This is a scenario that actually, in this case, consists of scenarios that have been predefined. So it's like a nested thing, right? And in this case, they're doing things like, in one place only, setting things like, am I storing cookies? Am I allowing redirects? What are the headers I'm sending all the requests, right? And then they include their three modules, the login module, the product creation module, and the logout one. And then the execution block, you'll always have an execution block in a Taurus file. And that could be as simple as run this JMX that already exists, or it could be hit these three URLs. Execution block is the most fundamental building block, and you'll see that in the docs if you take a look. In this case, we're saying run the scenario called executor, which is this, would be my friend Sally. Do iterations of 3, concurrency of 1. And and then the very last thing it has there is included configs pass-fail criteria. So let's look at pass-fail criteria. Okay. So there's a module in Taurus called pass-fail. Now, trick question. How do you set pass-fail criteria in JMeter? How do you tell JMeter you want it to fail a test if it has too many errors? Anybody know? Well, an assertion will tell you whether yeah, okay, fair enough. Okay. So I actually, how do you call JMeter from a command line and get back whether something succeeded or failed? And the answer is actually it won't tell you. It'll only tell you whether it ran a test or it didn't. So if it wasn't able to load the test and run it, it gives you an error code saying something went wrong. If it did run the test, no matter whether it succeeded or failed, let's say I ran that test. Right now, yes, you can then go parse the test result file and figure out whether it succeeded or failed, but that's not a very friendly command line call. right? That's yet another thing you got to do, right? One thing that Taurus does is it adds this pass-fail criteria that affects the return code of having called it Taurus, right? And so in this case, I'm defining pass-fail criteria, and I'm saying that the average round trip, if it's greater than 5 seconds, stop the test as a failure. It takes more than 5 seconds. If success is less than 100%, if I get any errors at all, zero tolerance, stop it as failed, okay? The last thing is commented out module BlazeMeter, which is that I could actually just tell it, hey, by the way, put all the results up in BlazeMeter so I have them for later, or I can share them more easily. But again, I'm trying to focus on what Taurus does out of the box here. But just by adding module BlazeMeter, it actually will send the reporting up. It'll upload all the artifacts actually up there and make it easy for everybody to download if they want. So that was the pass-fail criteria. Now, we've done everything. Let's actually run this. So let's first go to the web page. And I don't know how well you guys can see this. It's tiny little things, but we're on the products page, and the highest product number is 4. There's a product 2, a 3, and a 4, and that's it, right? And I'm going to go over to back here, and okay. So I'll clear the screen so it's easier to understand. By the way, you can see the text in the back. Can you read that? Okay. So I'm just going to run BZT, which is the command line for Taurus, BlazeMeter Taurus. Add product script YML. That was that main file that does all the logic, calls the CSV files, calls the test fail, pass fail criteria, et cetera. And then what's going to happen is it's going to launch Taurus. Because I've gone into this kind of, chunky presentation mode, you can see more than this in a typical Taurus window, but I'm trying to enlarge it so you guys can all see it. Watch down here. You see these labels coming by. Get login has run once with no failures. Login with data has now run once. Over here, by the way, I have like things like CPU and whatever I'm doing. Products page, create product, send new product, right? So I'm getting I'm invoking those different parts of the test, and I'm getting back statistics on how long it took to run them and whether they succeeded or failed, whether there's any errors. These are incrementing to 2. Once you get past 2, the next time it runs, it's gonna go away because the test is gonna be done. It's running 3 times. Right? Boom. Okay. So let's go back and refresh this page. Ta-da. Now we have products 5, 6, and 7. Okay, so we were able to log in, we were able to figure out what the highest number was, we were able to create 3 new products in the catalog, and we were able to log out, right? And that is kind of the end of the demo of a complex user scenario. So let's see if we have any more questions based on what you saw. And I know that some of you, if Taurus is new to you, this is kind of, if you already grokked with Taurus and you're thinking, oh, well, I've seen how to send requests, and I know how to set criteria, and I know how to do a search, this is kind of bolting it all together. The idea is that and this is a more complex scenario. It's not something one of the goals of Taurus is if you're curious about something, you can bang a test out in 5 or 10 minutes, right? You would not bang this test out in 5 or 10 minutes, right? You're saying, how did they build this, right? Well, you had to study what's the dialogue, what's in the form. There's work to do to kind of understand that stuff. It wasn't, a week's worth of work, but it was probably a few hours to do all that in complex. In the simple scenario, you just want to hit some endpoints and figure out if they can handle scale. Can they handle 100 concurrent users hitting in a very short period of time and send back valid results? You can write that test in a few minutes, right? Without a roving JMeter. So in this case, you're actually running a more complex test, and it is something that you could hopefully explain to somebody else. You could transfer to somebody else. It's not like crazy complex, one-off code. Let's go back here to the deck. So I did have a slide I could have showed before we went in. Let's do this, right? So there was that add product script YAML file. That's kind of the mother of the whole thing. It had a user data file that, in this case, just contained the user and login. It had a product info CSV that had a lot of the data to make that form data-driven, so that you didn't have to hard code the data. The product info. That should be this one here. Yeah, product info was just basically, CSV file that had the short description, the long description, the price, that kind of thing, so that you could go through and do it. So that and then the the increased variable groovy was really a one-liner that basically said, grab the value, convert it into an integer, add 1 to it, turn it back into a string, and then that last one was a pass-without criteria. Right? So I have some time here for more Q&A, and also wanted to point you to the GetTaurus.org site, and on the GetTaurus.org site there's a support forums link, and that's a very active Google group where people ask questions and ponder things that they want to be able to get done, and trying to do this, how do I do that? You can obviously search that for stuff that's on the topic you're curious about, or just boldly post a new topic. If you want to make friends, you should probably search first, but whatever. That's pretty much what I wanted to cover. How are we doing on time out there?
We just went over.
Got it.
So a couple of minutes.
We're good. Okay. So theoretically, we're supposed to be having more social time and more beers now. But you guys had a lot of questions as we went, which is great. Thank you. Any more questions at this point?
Is there a formal?
Sorry, go ahead.
Is there a formal reference for DSL?
For the DSL? Yes. So the question was, is there a formal reference for the DSL? And there's sort of two answers to that question. We go to getTaurus.org. So the first thing is that you go to the user manual, and if you look, and just full disclosure, the JMeter has the most support in this tool. It was originally built around support for JMeter, and we've been extending support to other tools. So JMeter has the superset of DSL capabilities. Some of the other tools have less things you can do from the DSL. But if you go to the JMeter one and you look in here, you'll find, and if you look on the right side of the screen here, you'll find, and let me scroll down so you actually see that. So it says building a test plan from config. And just a lingo thing, config, these are all config files. So this is sort of the blank as code. So infrastructure as code has this model, which is that you just have a bunch of config files, and that actually creates everything for you. So you might call them scripts or programs, but in this case, they're called configs because they're just these config files that have these text in them, right? This starts from the simple thing, defining scenarios, how to do global settings, but it has things like how to send HTTP requests, how to do extractions, assertions, how to add script blocks with JSR 223, logic blocks, if, loop, while, for each, transaction blocks, including scenarios, action blocks. So if you know JMeter, these things should sound familiar, right? And it lets you define all these things as YAML. And what's cool, if you come into the site and you're looking at an example, let's go look at an assertion rule, okay? So this is just a simple assertion thing right here. This is expressed as YAML, but with a simple click over here, I can say, show me that as JSON. It's much faster, by the way, on here. There's a lag on my screen sharing. But so if you think in JSON and you'd rather see it as JSON, you can toggle back between the two. So there are code examples here, right? And then more importantly, before you do that, and this is in my cheat sheet I handed out that the list of URLs, is that you probably want to first go to this YAML tutorial. Because the YAML tutorial basically says, okay, look, here's how you build your files. Right, here's what the text looks like. Here's why there's a dash there. Here's how you do it in YAML. Here's how you do it in JSON. And then teaching you sort of the fundamentals of how things are done in YAML. There's this notion of dictionary. Dictionary is really just sort of name-value pairs for the most part, one way to look at it. And it's all expressed here, and it's literally like, it's not even, let's see, it's 1, 2, it's about 3.5 screenfuls. Right? So there's not a ton of reading here to understand. And there's even a little bit on gotchas, and there's a link to online validation tools if you want to actually validate your YAML using a tool instead of trying to study it yourself for errors. You had a question in the back?
Just Jenkins integration.
Jenkins integration? Yeah. So you might ask the question, do you have a Jenkins plugin? And actually,
That's why I was wondering if you could do this all.
Yeah.
Within.
So the fundamental design model here is actually do everything from a CLI, from a command line interface, so that it works everywhere. Works in Jenkins, works in Travis, works in home-built tool, works in any orchestration tool. So if you can write a command line, you can do this. And it has the JUnit results. You know, if you want to play friendly, and by the way, there's a brand new blog post showing how to use the performance plugin in Jenkins to string it all together and have, get your reports the way you want them and get the graphs coming up and all that fun stuff. But the short answer is it works anywhere you can invoke a command line. So home-built scripts, any tool that lets you shell out, basically, will run it. Another question?
Yeah, I was kind of pitching this to some of our DevOps people the other day, and the response I got was, we're kind of overloaded in frameworks, Cucumber and so forth.
Okay.
How would you, I guess the question is, define this as a framework versus this as an orchestration tool? Or?
Well, that's a good question. Okay, so if people have got so many frameworks or tools and stuff, do they really want to get another tool? And how do we convince them it's worth it? And then how do we describe it, right? Without having a longer conversation about what they're already using and what they're interested in or what their problems they're trying to solve, I'm not sure I have a blanket answer. I think that for people who need to add testing to what they're doing, it's an execution framework. Then there's also that DSL creation, the DSL test creation thing, right? Which is sort of not the test running framework, but test creation. So it lives kind of a hybrid life. If you're already expressing tests in some kind of code-based sort of text world, Cucumber has a lot of stuff. There aren't a lot of sort of really simple, down-to-earth tools for doing your own testing from scratch, and Taurus sort of aims to be more of a fundamental thing. At some point, we could try to do some more like, well, if you like this or do that, this, I could go deeper. I have to think more about.
Yeah, I wasn't really trying to say, well, Taurus is better, or whatever. But I'm just
trying to explain it to them, right?
Yeah, I think of it as an orchestration tool, but it's also a framework, and so I'm sure it has similarities with a number of products, but I was just trying to see if there's kind of a slot to put it in.
Well, I would have loved to have been there for that conversation, because those exact conversations are what sort of the next step, which is that we have early adopters who are using this. We have people that totally understand it or loving it, but to spread it to a larger crowd and have more people be able to make use of it, we need to put it in context they already understand. So watch this space. Yeah. All right. I want to thank everybody. If anybody's still on remotely, thank you very much for joining us. We're going to switch gears now and go sort of a little more casual on Q&A and just have what's left of the beer and the pizza, and hang out for a few more minutes, and we'll wrap from there. So thank you guys all for coming.
Thank you, Dave.
Straightforward.
Yeah.
Good job. What was that?